Grace and peace are God's gift to you because He's strong enough, even when we're not. Dear Christian friends, it's always been important to be strong, right? There's always been this underlying current in our culture that strength is important in whatever form that might be. Because weakness is a liability. Weakness leaves you exposed, leaves you vulnerable, leaves the important things in your life open to attack. And so it's always been important in our world to not only be able to show it, but to have strength. But what happens when you're not strong enough? I mean, sometimes it happens where you're just literally not physically able to do that thing. Or maybe you're not, like that thing just hits you and it really throws you off and it paralyzes you with fear because you weren't emotionally strong enough. Or you give in to that temptation again because you weren't spiritually strong enough. Then what? Well, you could probably figure it out a little bit in your mind, and if you've read any kind of like self-help type books, self-improvement type materials, you'd probably guess that they would tell you, identify the weakness and work to eliminate the weakness. And that's okay advice until you start to realize there's a lot of times when I'm just not strong enough. Like it's not just one thing here or one thing there. There are a lot of times, a lot of situations in my life where I'm not strong enough. And so how do I face and try to overcome and try to strengthen all of those weaknesses all at once? Because it can sure be a lot. That painful reality is our big idea for today. You can fill in the blanks. God allows me to face situations where I'm not strong enough so that I rely on His strength. And we see that very thing today in our scripture reading from the Old Testament book of Judges. Now let me give you a little bit of background because even that term is used differently in the Bible than in our modern context, right? The Bible judges are not like modern day judges who wear the robe and sit up on the bench and rap the gavel and, court is now in session. The Old Testament Bible judges, those were a series of leaders that God raised up and put in place to deliver His people. So God had rescued His people from the slavery in Egypt, right? Brought them through that 40 years in the wilderness, protecting and providing for them, brought them into the land He had promised, the literal promised land, helped them conquer it, and now they had settled down. And they had built houses and planted crops and began to raise families, and they just got into their regular routine of life. And as a result, they kind of forgot about God. I mean, not totally, but they forgot about what God had done for them, because that was at least more than 5 minutes ago. And they forgot about God's deliverance again and again and again. And they even turned away from God and began to worship false gods. And so God would allow a series of physical hardships because of their spiritual adultery. And then when the people would cry out for help, God would raise up these judges to deliver His people from their oppression. That's the scene that we find in Judges chapter 6. The Midianites had unified a number of other nations, and they had formed an alliance along the south and east borders of Israel. And to the west was water. So they had kind of encircled them almost completely. And what would happen is these armies would come in when planting season began. They would burn their houses, they would destroy their towns, they would slaughter their cattle, they would eat all of their food, and then they would go home when the seasonal rains ended, when the growing season stopped. The sad thing is, this went on for 7 years before the Israelites finally cried out to God for help. We see how bad the situation is in the first verse of our text from Judges 6, verse 11. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. Now, two things about that verse. Gideon is threshing wheat in a winepress. A winepress is a big tub that you put grapes into, press on them, and out comes wine, right? It's an enclosed space. Wheat was normally threshed on a threshing floor, a flat and open space, so that the wind could blow the garbage, the chaff away. But Gideon was doing it in this wine press. Something that was not very productive, not very efficient, not really what it was made for, but it was the only way to keep the Midianites from knowing that he had wheat. That's how bad things had gotten. The second thing to notice about this is who shows up. Right? The very first words, notice they don't say an angel of the Lord. This isn't just a messenger that God sent. This is the angel of the Lord. That's a title, a phrase that's used in the Old Testament for God, the second person of the Trinity. And we see that played out again here, where we realize that this is God himself. But it seems as though he took on human form because Gideon just holds a regular conversation with him, at least at first. Take a look at verse 12. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Now, mighty warrior is actually what the name Gideon means, and it might seem almost like God is being a little ironic or sarcastic here, because Gideon's hiding, basically, the fact that he has a tiny little bit of food. But the thing that's going to make him a mighty warrior is the very first part of that phrase, that sentence, right? The Lord is with you. Gideon, however, he wasn't so sure about that. Look at verse 13. "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." Now, Gideon is showing respect to this stranger that showed up and started talking with him, right? He calls him my Lord, but it's not capital L. And that's clear in the original Hebrew. It's like saying sir, right? It's a term of respect. But he's going to respectfully disagree with what God had just said, "The Lord is with you." I'm not so sure about that, sir. Because look at the oppression, look at the disaster that's happened to us. Look at how hard things are for us. Look at the danger we're in every day. And we know what God has done in the past, right? We heard all about the deliverance from Egypt. We heard about his miracles time and time and time again. Where is any of that? It sure seems like God is not here, like he's checked out and he's left us into the hands of the Midianites. But God had other plans. He had a purpose for Gideon. Verse 14. The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" God told Gideon, "Go. I've got a mission for you, and you have the strength to do it." God knew this because God made Gideon, right? Knew his qualities, knew his strengths. And best of all, the Lord was going to be with him. He's the one who was sending Gideon to rescue his people. Gideon, though, was pretty sure he was not strong enough. Look what he says. "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." So Manasseh had never been a leader, and neither had his descendants. Gideon's family, they were the weakest clan among the tribe, and Gideon was the least in his family. God, how am I supposed to do this? I have no strength, I have no position, I have no status, I have no authority, I have no stature, I have no standing. And for Gideon, all of that meant that he had no strength. But God had a different answer. The Lord answered, I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none behind. There's the answer, right? I will be with you. The exact words that God spoke to Moses when he sent him on his mission as well. When he had a purpose for Moses, I will be with you. Because here's the thing. You may not think you're strong enough, Gideon, but if God is with you, what other strength do you need? When you're faced with something that God makes beautifully clear in His Word, but is something that you think is really hard, something that maybe you think you have no standing on, no authority to speak into, right? Who am I to tell my friend, to tell my loved one that what they're doing is sinful? I've got no status there. Who am I? I've got no position to speak up on this matter, in this situation, with these people. I'm a nobody. I've got no standing, and therefore, I maybe just shouldn't do it. I have no strength. God, however, has a different promise. It's our first takeaway today. That God promises to give me strength for His purposes. God doesn't promise to give us strength for all of the things that we want, but He does promise to give us strength for all of the things He tells us to do, which I think are probably the ones that we find the hardest usually, right? When God tells you, He's abundantly clear that we are to forgive and forgive and forgive and forgive. But that's really hard, and I'm not sure I'm strong enough for that. And He tells us to love the way He loves us. And He tells us to be kind and compassionate and generous and patient. And those things are really hard. And I'm just not sure I'm strong enough. Except the things God tells us to do are the things God promises to give us the strength for. Because like God promised to Gideon, if He's with you, what other strength do you need? Now, Gideon asked this stranger, right, that was giving him this mission, who he was, what authority he had to make this kind of a promise. And God proved He was God. And then He disappeared. And Gideon was left filled with awe and holy fear. But he embarked on the first step of the mission God gave him, and that was to destroy the Baal and Asherah altars that were right there in his community. Gideon, though, wasn't quite sure he had the strength to do it. So he didn't go in the middle of the day when anybody could see him. He went at night. And after he did so, though, the Spirit of the Lord came on him, and he put out a call, right? A call for troops. We're going to go and fight the Midianites and to 4 of the northern tribes of Israel. And that's where chapter 7 picks up. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. But the Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me." Now, God had promised that He would deliver the Midianite army into Gideon's hands. But God also realized the sinful pride that lives in every single human heart. In Gideon's, in his troops, and yours and mine. And God knew that they were going to want to take credit for any accomplishment, any kind of victory that they would have, just like we do. And that's why God, he wanted to make the numbers look a little, well, in his eyes, better, in humanly speaking, worse, right? That's why he told Gideon, you've got too many troops, which, if you know the situation, is crazy. Let me just show you. So the Midianite army was 135,000 troops. Gideon, when he put out the call, summoned 32,000. So he's 4-1, outmanned. Those are bad odds. Very, very few armies, generals would go into battle with those kind of odds, with those kind of numbers. But God knew that there was still a possibility that when he delivered the people, when he wiped out the Midianite army, that they would do what the sinful hearts always want to do, and look for a way to justify, to claim credit and the victory, right? Whether it was Gideon's cunning strategy, or the bravery of the Israelite soldiers, or whatever it might be. And so God, he wanted to pare those numbers down a little bit more. Take a look at verse 3. Now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. Look at those numbers again. 135,000, that's still the size of the Midianite army. Now Gideon is down to 10,000 men. He's outnumbered more than 10, almost 10.5 to 1. Those are terrible odds. No one would go into battle. But God wasn't done yet. But the Lord said to Gideon, there's still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there. If I say, this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home. So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and trumpets of the others. God used this strange test for a really simple purpose. It seems as though there's no other reason to have this kind of a test besides the fact that there really aren't very many people who lap water like a dog. Most people drink it like most people. Which meant that 97% of Gideon's army now went home. So this is what the numbers looked like. 135,000, still the Midianite army. Gideon, though, has 300, which means he's now outnumbered 450 to 1. Every Israelite soldier would have to kill 450 of the enemy just to be able to win victory. This is completely impossible. Those are horrible numbers. No one in their right mind would ever go into battle. There's no way the Israelites could possibly win because they simply weren't strong enough. And that's exactly what God wanted. That brings us to our second takeaway. Here's why. When I am strong enough, I think I don't need God. Have you ever found that to be true? Don't you just wish that God would just make life all sunshine and rainbows all of the time? And you ever wonder why he doesn't? You've probably realized that if you haven't before, right, that when life is good and problems are small, well, you probably tend to rely on God a lot less. You tend to pray less. You tend to spend less time listening to Him and His Word. You kind of just go about your own business because you think that you're strong enough. And in that moment, on that day, maybe you are. And that's why God pushes us outside of our comfort zone. That's why God allows difficulty, challenges, hardships, things that go beyond what we think we are able to handle. Because He knows that you and I, we are all glory hounds. We want the praise. We want to say, yeah, look at, I handled that problem. I'm strong enough to handle my mess, to clean up my problems. I'm strong enough. We want the credit. We want the accolades. We want to have the accomplishments and the victories under our name. And when we do, well, we really don't think we need God. So, God allows family turmoil. God allows diseases, physical problems. God allows marriage difficulties, fertility problems. He even allows global conflict because it forces us to realize, I can't fix this. I'm not strong enough to be able to deal with this, whatever this is in your life. And He allows it to push us past what we think we can handle, maybe even to the breaking point, maybe even past. Because I'm not strong enough. And it forces us to rely on some other source of strength, specifically God. Maybe you think of the opening words of the Psalm 46, that end up becoming the hymn that we love to sing as Lutherans, right? A mighty fortress is our God. Psalm 46 begins, the Lord is our refuge and strength. Or maybe you just crack open your Bible and you find one of the countless examples of God's power and His strength in His Word, right? Making the things, right? We heard our kids say it this morning as He made all things by the power of His Word. Calming storms, healing incurable diseases, raising the dead, parting the Red Sea, feeding millions of people every single day for 40 years in a desert. The list could go on and on and on. And every single one of them was an impossible situation for the humans involved. They had zero answer to the problem. They simply were not strong enough to fix it. But God was. And God did. And He did so in ways that left no doubt about who it was that had won the victory, who had accomplished it, who was strong enough. And that's God. Now, Gideon, though, he was still pretty nervous. I mean, the odds are terrible, right? The numbers are ridiculous. 450 to 1. And so God told him, go and do a little recon. Sneak down there and get some intel tonight at the enemy camp. And so Gideon did, and he heard some guards talking, and one of them was talking about a dream that he had had where a stone came rolling down the hill and crushed their camp. And the other soldiers, the other guards said, well, that can only mean one thing. The stone is Gideon's army, and it's coming to crush us. And Gideon knew then that God was true to His word. He ran back to camp, and look what happened. Verse 16. Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them, with torches inside. Watch me, he told them, follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp, blow yours and shout, for the Lord and for Gideon. Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed the guard. They blew their trumpets and broke the jars that were in their hands. The three companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars. Grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow, they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." While each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. The army fled to Bethshitta as far as Zererah, as far as the border of Abel-Meholah, near Tabbath. God did what God promised, like God always does. And he did it without Gideon and his men hardly raising a sword. They did later. They chased them, right? They pursued those who remained. But notice, they never invaded the camp. They wiped out a Midianite army with a torch in one hand and a trumpet in the other. 300 men versus 135,000. But 300 men plus God. Because God had promised he was going to deliver them, and he did. He threw the Midianites into such confusion and disarray as they were awoken in the middle of the night and they saw these torches and heard the trumpets, and they pulled out their swords and they began fighting the person next to them, their own fellow soldier. And these 300 troops that had no business even beginning a battle won a decisive victory. They weren't strong enough, but God was, and he won the victory for them. Because that's what God does. He wins victories. And he wins victories for his people. The greatest example, the greatest victory that God ever won wasn't found on a battlefield, wasn't found in your home, wasn't found in some corporate office or at your job site. It was found on a cross. Because there God took on insurmountable odds. He fought a battle that we can't fight. I mean, we know that, right? Sin comes at us and we cave. We just are not strong enough far too often. We hear the siren call of friends, coworkers. Our hearts lead us astray. We know it's wrong, and yet we go. And we aren't strong enough to fight temptation half of the time, much less the sin after the fact. But Jesus is. And Jesus did. He is strong enough to never give in to temptation. Not once in his whole life for you. Jesus was strong enough to face the inhuman torture and suffering for you. Jesus suffered and faced the wrath of God and was strong enough to do so for you. He died not because he wasn't strong enough. No, he died as the payment for your sin. And he proved it, that he had conquered sin, that he had power over sin, because death, the thing that gives sin its power, right, it had no grip on him. And he showed that when he walked out of that grave alive, risen from the dead, to prove his victory that's your victory. Because it was your sin that he paid for. It was your death that he defeated. That victory is yours. And he wants you to understand how amazingly incredible those odds are, right? 450 to 1, that's nothing. When you think about the thousands and millions of my failings and your faults and the world's sins. Now we're getting into billions and trillions, number that only Congress think about. And Jesus paid for them all. All of them. To win the victory for you. It brings us to our last takeaway. God's greatest display of his strength was Jesus' death and resurrection for my sins. in Jesus, you have a victory. And it's not just a victory that relieves you from a temporary problem, an immediate difficulty, this right now hardship. This is the problem, this is the relief, the deliverance that rescues you from an eternal separation and gives you an eternal peace. Dear friends, God wants you to remember that, to remember His strength, His power, and to rely on it in the days when things are good and especially when they are not. When you feel you are not strong enough, you're right. And God is using it to cause you to rely on Him. And He especially wants you to do that with your sin, because He's already won that victory. So when the devil comes accusing, and the temptation comes and trips you, and the guilt begins to pile up, we can always run to Jesus, because He's both strong and kind, and He has won the victory and paid for them all. Amen.
Jesus said, if I am lost, He will come to me. And He showed